doing? Good, thanks. I'm Stevie. I'm with the Asian A.V Club, and we'd love to do profiles. And so, if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of like go back a little bit more macro before we get into the film.
Yeah,
But I
of
was wondering,
course.
like, growing up in Sydney, what was that like for you? And I'm just curious because I'm always fascinated with the origin story of everybody and how they kind of got into the
Yeah.
arts, especially Asians. Like, we're always like,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm just curious, like, what was the thing that kind of inspired you to be like, okay, this is the lane that I'd really like to kind of lean in a little
Yeah.
bit more
I
when you're
mean,
young.
when I was 12-ish, like 11, 12 years old, I first wanted to be an actress. And I don't really know, like I love movies, I love TV, and I was just like, oh, it'll be so cool to pretend to be somebody else, and like the fame and the fortune and all that, And I did some acting classes and was really bad. And I was like, okay, maybe I should pivot. And then it was around like 14, 15 years old when I started watching. I got a job at Blockbuster Video back when I was still around, and I really got into movies, and I watched Fight Club for the first time, and just was just like, this is the way this made me feel by the end. I didn't know anything about it. But the way it made me feel, the morals, the ethics that, it talked about with consumerism and everything, it just was incredible. And I remember that feeling. I remember running downstairs to my parents who were cooking dinner. I remember this moment. I was like, I think I want to be a movie director. I want to make people feel what this movie just made me feel. It was like the highlight of the year, that feeling. And so after that, from like 15 to 18, when I was in high school, like I'd make stupid short films with my friends and I'd edit them. And, I made like a stupid alien video with my friends and force them to act in it, during lunch times. And then I went to undergrad and did psychology and film production. And then after that, I worked in TV for a couple of years and then was like, I need to come out to America. I need to try and make that dream come true and try and make movies, which is what I wanted to do since I was, 15 years old, and got to make my first one now.
What is it like when, because like even for me, I grew up in Hong Kong, and so like we're all raised on American content, and then when you finally make your way
Yes.
to the US, what was that like for you? Because even for me, it was very interesting because obviously in Hong Kong, I was raised as a majority, right? And then so when I went to the
Mm.
US, all of a sudden there was this like Asian identity thing, and I'm like, what do you mean? That's like my
Yeah.
that's that And so did you have a little bit of an interesting kind of entree into a world where especially in the West Coast, there's such a strong AAPI like kind of focus and how did that kind of what were your observations kind of being in a creative environment where like that was almost a superpower, if you will, like what was that like for you to kind of
Yeah.
like go into something like that?
Even though Australia and Sydney is very multicultural, I think the film environment in Sydney was very white, especially when I was growing up. And so it did feel kind of like, I don't know if I'm fully in that world and being accepted and allowed to make the types of stories I wanted to make. And so it was really nice to come out to LA, to America, and to your point, like feel really accepted by this community, but it's also strange because I do feel like my identity is still very split because I feel in a lot of ways very kindred to the Asian American, people, but also, I mean, I grew up Australian, like the food, the culture, like the way I talk. There's certain words I still say that, Americans are like, huh, so and I just went to an Australian gala the other night, and I was like, oh wow, like just to hear the accent and like be among my people. So it is kind of this interesting, I don't know, push and pull for me still. Um, but I feel really lucky in that I also got to kind of get my start in this industry when Crazy Rich Asians happened, when like all of these really quintessential Asian American films kind of blew up. And so that really paved the way, I think, for Slanted.
What's kind of also fascinating is that, especially in your career, you also started to lean towards your writing. And I'm curious, like,
Yes.
was that a parallel experience for you, or was that something that you had to like learn how to become also just to kind of survive in an industry?
Yeah, it's that. So like when I first came to America to because I came to America for to go to the American Film Institute, and I did a directing course there, directing in masters in directing. And my second year at AAPI, a screenwriter, Matson Tomlin, came in who had graduated a few years ahead of me. And he said to us directors, he was like, if you don't come from money, if you don't have a famous uncle, you need to learn how to write because no one's going to give you an opportunity to direct anything straight out of film school. And if you don't want to work at Starbucks, for a couple of years or be an assistant, like you got to learn how to write. And that's when I was like, shit, like I have to, like go in and learn writing. And like I'd never written a full length feature screenplay at that point. And I just wrote and read a lot of books and I shadowed a lot of screenwriting classes at AFI and just, really, really tried to build that muscle. And because of that, I was able to, I had a script on the blacklist and that opened up a lot of doors and I got to write on some great projects like Rich Asians 2 and, kind of build a name for myself in that capacity. And then I think because of that was able to transfer it to my first love and my greatest love, which is film directing.
I'm always curious about people who write and also direct. Does the writing kind of help you with beats in terms of how you are as a director? And like, do you feel like you're a better director, being able to write? And can you explain a little bit of why that
Yes,
would be? Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think especially because I'm so specific when it comes to my point of view and the types of stories I really relate to and want to tell. I think it's so helpful to be able to write it down myself because nobody else has my brain. Nobody else sees things the way I do, Um, and vice versa. Like with directing, it's like, just visually, like knowing that I hate words, as in I hate dialogue. Like if I can write a scene with no dialogue, that's the best way. So I can tell it visually and I can use my actors and use the production design, the cinematography, and the sound and all of that, all of those tools that you have in the toolbox as a director. So it really informs both. And I feel really happy that, I've been able to do both.
How long was the idea of Slanted kind of like in your head? Was it something that you feel was, like kind of slowly came into fruition, or was it, I don't know, I'm just curious like how long it like was in you
Yeah.
before you finally had to like put it down on paper.
I mean, I feel like it's always been in me, but
Yeah.
it wasn't really verbalized or like thought through until that there was a spa shooting in Atlanta a couple years ago, right, where a bunch of
Yeah.
Asian American women were killed, and that piece of news really brought back a lot of like memories and emotions, like very strong emotions. And I wrote like an Instagram post about how I was feeling and I went on a whole rant about racism and all of that. And it was around that time when I really kind of thought about how can I channel these very strong emotions into something productive where I could share this fear and the shame that I was feeling because of the way I looked, my face, something I can't change. Um, and it's so interesting. My dad always said to me when I was growing up, he was like, there are three things you can't change about yourself: your race, your sexuality, and who your parents are. Everything else you can change. And that always just really stuck with me. I was like, what if you could change the one thing you couldn't change? And how absurd would that be? And that's kind of where the concept kind of grew from.
There's also it's what I love about this film is like there's such a nice fine line between how absurd and to the point where it's almost not campy, but like it definitely there's like
Yeah,
humor in it.
yeah.
And then but then obviously like there's so many things that's rooted in a reality that, like I think a lot of people can relate to. And I'm just curious, like how did when you're kind of putting that together, um, even when you're shooting, is there a moment where you're like, hey, can everybody like go large, or can you how did you kind of like can you gauge it while
Yeah.
you're kind of like shooting this film?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of performance, I think I always kept it pretty grounded, you know, like I wanted them to really find all of, you know, Shirley, McKenna, Lee, and my tree to understand the weight of all of their decisions and what they're going through and with the parents especially. Um, but the humor, I mean, the humor was just, I mean, Amelie and my tree, like they kill it with the humor. And that's just something I mean, so much of it again was brought on by them. You know, Amelie improvised a little bit, especially in the nail salon scene. Like she just added so much humor herself, which was so great. Um, but yeah, a lot of the tonal shifts as well. I worked alongside my cinematographer and like we really mapped out, you know, which scenes were really hyper real and which scenes were more kind of downplayed. And then my composer as well, Shirley Song, I think she did a lot of heavy lifting to create a score that felt really cohesive and brought again all of the tones together.
I appreciate that, like, the people that work behind the camera, a lot of them are Asian too. And I'm just curious,
Yes.
was that a thing that you were like over the years, you were slowly collecting people and you're like, when I make that movie, you're that person. And I'm just like, how did you
Yeah,
kind of put
yeah.
everybody together? Because when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's really cool. She like,
Yeah. Yeah. Surprisingly not. I didn't you know, like a lot of these people you know, what was conscious was I wanted all of my heads of departments to be people of color and you know, when I could, female people of color, women. Um, you know, and that was a very conscious choice, decision that I wanted to make. Because again, like the subject matter, and like I'm so glad I did because all of them brought so much of themselves, you know, into the film. Like I remember my costume designer, Michelle, she said the song, the Teresa's Tang song that plays at the beginning of the film, she used to listen with her dad to, you know, on the way to work. And so, but yeah, I had never, I don't think Shirley, my composer, was somebody I knew for a long time, was a really, really close friend. But Ed, my cinematographer, I didn't know, you know, but I'm glad he went to AFI. I went to AFI. Julie Chen, my production designer, went to AFI. I went to AFI. So that
nice.
was a nice kind of, yeah, little thing, connection.
In terms of the film, I was while watching, I was really sad watching this young woman, like it's seeing the parents react to what's going on with what she does.
Yeah.
Did that did that kind of, as you were writing it and kind of directing, did that help you with your understanding of your parents? Because or was that something that was already there and you just wanted to like celebrate these people that took care of? I'm just curious like where that came from, because it was really nice watching that on screen.
Totally. I think it was a bit of both, you know. I think there were definitely things that I hadn't really confronted, you know, about myself and about my experience with my parents. And as I was actually writing the scene, one of the final scenes when, you know, she's on the bed with her parents, you know, talking it out. A lot of those lines I kind of found as I was writing and came from, you know, reminiscing and remembering, oh, why did my parents, you know, say this, or why did they react this way? Or like, why did I say this? Why was I so mean? And why was I so ashamed? So definitely allowed, I like to say all of my scripts are very like uh cathartic in that it just helps me. I like to write about things that I'm working through and trying to understand about myself. And as a result, I hope it helps others, you know, also try and understand more about themselves.
It's a great film. It's not, literally, I just wonder like what Joan would be like if she was around in real life, because that TikTok trend of being Chinese, becoming Chinese is so
I
fascinating.
know.
And I just watched it the whole time. I was just like, oh, she might not have made these choices if she was a real. Yeah, it was just interesting. So it kind of like triggered
Yeah,
some thoughts. But thank you so much. It's a really interesting
of
movie, and
course.
congratulations on your film. I can't wait to see what you do next.